Welcome to the Exodus and Beyond. I'm your host, author R.J. von-Bruening. In this video series, we'll be exploring the Exodus from an esoteric understanding as explored in my book, The Exodus and Beyond, Book 2 of Unlocking the Dream Vision. In this video, we'll take another look at the invasion and settlement of the children of Israel. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below and don't forget to subscribe for future videos. This series presents information based in part upon theory and conjecture of the system of esoteric symbolism. The purpose is to suggest some possible interpretation, but not necessarily the only one to the many mysteries we will explore. Picking up where we left off in our last video, where these children of Israel began moving to their respected lands that were determined by Lot, as we are told in the Exodus story in the Bible, under the leadership of the twin brothers. It is clear from the archaeological evidence found in and around the Indus River Valley that the Aryans did not bring a culture as advanced as the Hopparans. Nevertheless, the religious beliefs of the Aryans combined with the beliefs of the Hopparans laid the foundations of one of the world's greatest religions, Hinduism, including its rigid social system that we call caste. With our understanding of who these Aryan-speaking tribes were, allows us to understand that the religious and social structures imposed upon the population give us our closest look into the actual original religious beliefs of these children of Israel, or the beliefs of Moses. Although Hinduism is one of the great religions of the world, it's a vastly different belief system than the traditional monotheistic religions of the Western world, or the people we normally think of as the Jews in particular. Our best source of information about this ancient time of Aryan India comes from the Rig Veda and numerous other Vedic hymns that have survived. Within these ancient texts, we find a world of Bronze Age barbarians with advanced bronze and iron weapons mounted on horseback moving into the Indus Valley. Some archaeologists believe that they can actually identify in the Vedic hymns references to the destruction of the Hopparan city-states. The general setting of the Vedic hymns is a land that stretched from the western banks of the Indus River to the mighty Ganges River far to the east. It was a rich land inhabited by a light-skinned Aryan-speaking people that made up the elite classes of rulers and religious leaders while living alongside the much more numerous dark-skinned natives. Before the coming of the tribes of Aryans, the ancient societies of the various people who lived in the northern India and the Indus Valley were all connected by deeply rooted traditions that centered around family, clan, and tribal ties. Once the Aryan tribes had arrived and established their control, this ancient pattern of life began to slowly give way to the Aryan social organization of society that we now know as the caste system. In order to understand this, we first must look at the ancient Aryan system to be able to understand this later development into Hinduism. This process will also allow us to investigate the Israelites' original religious beliefs that compose this second part of the great exodus out of Egypt. The vast caste system that still governs much of Indian society to this very day appears to have been born out of the first social divisions of early Aryan tribal society. The division of society consisted of a ruling aristocracy class known as the Kshatriyas. This warrior aristocracy shared power with a very powerful priestly class known as the Brahmas, both of which ruled over the ordinary peasant farmers known as the Vaishyas. These made up the majority of the people. Movement between these three classes of society appears to have been possible in the very beginning. The only actual unleapable barrier in these early times seems to have been between the native-born non-Aryans and the Aryans themselves. One of the words to describe the original inhabitants of India by the Aryans was Dashi, which eventually became known as to mean slave. One of the first categories added to the class system was for non-Aryans known as the Sudras, or the unclean. These were the dark-skinned native people who could not study or hear the Vedic hymns of the Aryans. This division of the sutras from the Aryans clearly rested on the Aryans' wish to preserve their racial purity and integrity against the native peoples. Over the century, this basic system of division of society based on three primary classes was slowly elaborated upon. A society that slowly grew more complex, inserting further divisions and subdivisions into the system that were based more or less upon occupation. Nevertheless, no matter how complex the system became, the priestly class of the Brahmas was always the highest class of society that played a crucial role in all the parts of society. The Brahmas became so powerful that even the kings of all the minor kingdoms could not stand against them or question their actions. Soon after, with the Brahma's blessing, marriage and eating taboos were eventually codified within each class, restricting them to marrying within each of them, eating only food cooked by fellow caste members, and most importantly, obeying the regulations that governed their class. These regulations typically limited who could belong to each caste and limited the numbers of each caste to a particular craft or profession. This lengthy process eventually led to the appearance of the caste system as we know it today. Not only did the Aryans lay the foundation of the caste system that still governs much of Indian society today, but with the help of this social system, it also laid the foundation of the religion that is still at the heart of Indian civilization, Hinduism. This is a religion that provides the moral framework and the religious reasons for the existence of the caste system too. According to the archaeological evidence, before the arrival of the Aryans, it appears that the religious worship of the people of the Indus Valley civilization was primarily focused on a Earth Mother or Mother Goddess figure, a male Shiva-like God Father figure, and bulls, along with numerous other gods and goddesses that were under these first original three. This simple arrangement of the worship of the mother goddess, a male sky god, along with a bull appears to be a common factor within the religions of every known ancient Bronze Age civilization and culture. Once again, as they had done in Egypt, one of the first things the Aryans did was elevate the existing minor male fertility god to being the supreme god of the entire pantheon. In this particular case, it was the god we know as Shiva. There have been several seals that have been found in the Harappan sites that appear to show a figure that looks much like the early versions of this god Shiva. These seals are normally found with stones that appear to be much like the lingam found in modern Hindu temples. This phallic cult object that is the symbolic element of the god Shiva. This phallic cult object is the next direct way to trace the movement of these people and their supreme god. Because once they had secured their political position over the local population, they always elevated the existing local minor male fertility god to the position of being the supreme god of the pantheon, which always accompanied some type of phallic cult symbolism. In ancient artwork, the symbolism of the supreme god is commonly displayed as a male god with an unusually large erect penis. This phallic symbolism also leads to confusion on this new supreme god's identity in later points in time in different cultures. Although it can lead to confusion, this unique phallic symbolism that is associated with this minor fertility god makes him particularly easy to follow through the different cultures. As we go deeper into this second phase of the Exodus, this symbolism and how to follow it will become much more understandable. In addition to elevating the minor male fertility god to being the supreme god, he also becomes the mighty storm god whose legendary weapon is always the same terrible thunderbolt. This brings us to our first example of how the Aryans slowly fused and assimilated their religious beliefs with the local population's existing beliefs. Based on the evidence we have, the original supreme god of the Aryans appears to have been a god known as Idra. Before arriving in the Indus Valley, Idra was the Aryan god of the storm, thunder, and life-giving rain. He was the great lord of the heavens, the greatest of all warriors, and was above all the other gods in power and standing. His greatest weapon was a bolt of thunder, or a lightning bolt. He is also known as a god who disguised himself to win over women and went to any lengths of scheming to help keep his position as leader of the gods. These traits are the same traits of the supreme god of many other cultures, with Zeus of Greek mythology being one of the best known examples in the Western world. These common elements of Idra appear to be the same in the earliest known versions of the Shiva-like god of the Indus Valley civilization. Our next step is to understand how the Aryans put this assimilation and fusing of the local religious beliefs with their own into actual practice. Once the Aryans had established themselves in the Indus Valley, they replaced their version of the supreme god with the local one. In this case, the Aryan supreme god Idra was replaced with the existing Shiva-like god of the native people. It also appears that the Aryans kept their own mythology of Idra while superimposing it onto the Shiva-like god of the natives. Slowly, over time, possibly centuries, these two gods fused into one god, creating the god Shiva as he is known today. Remarkably, although these two gods were fused into one, the Aryan god Idra was also fused with the local version of the god of the waters, a god remembered in the Vedic hymns as Varnana. This existing native god of the waters was an almost exact copy of the Hyksos god Hadad and the Babylonian god Adad in the Vedic hymns. Varnana is known as the ruler of the world and enforcer and upholder of law and order. He is said to have had 1,000 eyes and oversees the entire world of man. Hence, he is commonly known as the god of moral law that punishes those who transgress against the law, but forgives them out of compassion because he loves them when they repent of their transgressions and pray and make sacrifices to him. He's also the mighty lord of the oceans and water and all the aquatic animals in the same way as Poseidon or Neptune are in their respective cultures. He's also known to be the lord of the winds, which help sustain life by bringing the rains to the crops. In the earliest Vedic writings, he was the supreme king of the gods in the beginning of time, but he yielded his position as supreme king when he was fused with Idra, with his kingship transferring to the new supreme god Shiva. Although we're missing numerous details, this small bit of information allows us to understand that the Indo-European people were willing to shuffle and modify their pantheon of gods as needed to accommodate the local population. When they began to assimilate and fuse the belief systems, the customs, and culture of the native population, they would not change the basic principles of the local belief to win over the hearts and minds of the lower classes that made up the bulk of the population. A modern example of this process can be seen in how the early Catholic Church assimilated, fused, and ultimately Christianized many pagan beliefs throughout Europe while keeping the basic ideas of Christianity and the teachings of the Catholic Church and Jesus Christ more or less intact. This willingness of the Aryans and the Indo-European people in general to modify their pantheon to fit with the local religious beliefs and customs adds numerous layers of confusion as these people slowly move from place to place. Adding to this confusion, it appears that it was common for the other tribes to adopt some of these changes before they moved on to the new lot of land under the leadership of the twin brothers. Although these things do make it difficult to follow which god is which in the many different religions of the ancient world, however, as we go farther into this second phase of the Exodus, we will be able to use this to help untangle much of this confusion. The next primary god in the earliest Vedic pantheon of the Aryans is the god Angi. He is the great master of fire, sacrifices, and wealth. The entire Vedic religion of the Aryans, and with the later Hindu belief system, is centered around sacrificial concepts. It is through sacrifice that the creation process which the gods achieved at the beginning of time had to be endlessly repeated to keep all of creation intact and functioning. It is believed that through Angi's holy sacrificial flames that men could reach the gods. He was thought to be the messenger of the gods as well being the high priest of the gods. These are the same traits that the later messenger gods of the Greek and Roman cultures, Hermes and Mercury, also possess. Angi is also one of the first places where we see the reference to the twin brothers leading the second phase of the Exodus outside of the dream vision. In the Vedic hymns, it is said that Enki was the twin brother of Idra. As we go deeper into the second phase of the Exodus, we will see this type of twin reference will show up again and again in every single culture. What may not be evident at this moment in time, but this ancient Vedic thought, and even within modern day Hinduism, we can see the earliest beginnings of the modern Christian idea of the Holy Trinity with the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost within these three primary gods of the Vedic hymns of Shiva, Idra, and Enki. As with ancient Egypt and the Theban triad, this small realization provides us with a unique view into the minds of these ancient Israelites and our first chance to begin identifying each of these ancient gods. We rely on our esoteric knowledge. We know that to our ancient, distant Cro-Magnon man ancestors at this ancient point in time, the mighty heaven that was floating up above the clouds looking down upon all of humanity like a great eye of the Almighty Himself. At this early time, this is not the abode of the host of heaven or a place where mortal men could even go and return from. It's clearly stated within the ancient mythologies at this time that this heaven, as I've been referring to it through our series, was still viewed as a thing that passed overhead daily and not a place where you could go. To our ancient Cro-Magnon man ancestors, it was thought of a god in and by itself. However, it was unlike any normal god, for it was the supreme god that was high above all the other gods as it looked down upon humanity as if it was the eye of the Creator itself. Our next step is to realize that our ancient ancestors, the mighty heaven, was viewed as some type of supreme god, and that any of the ships that came from the supreme god were thought to be some type of earthly incarnation of the supreme god, so it could interact with us mere mortals that walked upon the earth. Although this idea eventually underwent major transformation, this idea of the heaven being the supreme god is always somewhere there in the background and never actually really goes away. By understanding this, we can then realize that when our ancient ancestors interacted with one of these gods, they believed it to be an earthly incarnation of the great unknowable supreme god that they could see floating up above the clouds. For an example of this type of thinking, the Aryans believed that the messenger god Enki was an earthly incarnation of the unknowable Shiva, high above, and this was done so a mere mortal human could understand and interact with it. But at the same time, he wasn't the supreme god. To our Cro-Magnon man ancestors, Enki was viewed as just a different but often independent part of a larger whole of the supreme god that took the sacrifices of humanity back to the supreme god. This might seem a little bit confusing to modern minds, but it does allow us to begin realizing that slowly, very slowly over time, the mighty heaven becomes viewed as the father of all the gods, because all the other gods could be seeing, entering, and leaving this supreme god. With our esoteric knowledge and knowing that the gods were really advanced ships that interacted with humanity, we can understand that the ship that interacted with our ancestors far more than any other becomes known as the King of the Gods. This King of the Gods was already known to our ancient ancestors as the Lord of the Waters. Due to the constant interaction between this god and our ancient ancestor, he becomes to be viewed as the son of the supreme god, which then becomes viewed as the Father high above. The messenger god that also interacts with humanity on a regular basis slowly becomes thought of as the Spirit or Holy Ghost that is remembered in Christianity, that connects the earthly incarnation of the supreme god with the unknowable supreme god that looks down upon the mortal world of humanity. Although this idea might seem a bit confusing at the present, it will make much more sense as we go farther into our journey. In addition to these three primary gods, the Aryans also had one more important god, Shura. He was the god of light and power. His brilliant, radiating light helps keep the terror of the darkness at bay. He is the maker of the light that illuminates the world of mortals and of the gods. He is the destroyer of disease and ill health, and hence thought to bring good health to all. He is commonly depicted as golden in color, with light radiating from his hair. He is customarily seen as riding swiftly across the sky in a great golden chariot drawn by 7 divine horses. This description of Sutra is remarkably similar to the Greek god Helios, who also has many of the same elements of the god Apollo. As with Apollo, this god is believed to have the same magical-like powers with the ability to become invisible, and is the holder of the most sacred texts of the Vedas. He is always addressed at his rising by every devout Brahmin and held in a high place among the priestly class. In contrast, much of the native population, Sutra was only a minor god and treated as such by most of them. Although this god is seen throughout all the numerous cultures of the world, he is more of a mystery than most. He is commonly confused with the leader of the fallen watchers, the Lord of Light, also commonly known as Lucifer, the morning star. Even though he is commonly confused as the leader of the fallen watchers, the mythology implies that he is an older version of the sky god or supreme god that the local people would not give up. So he was incorporated into the pantheon as representing the sun with its daily journey across the sky. Not only did the Aryans modify and use their pantheon of gods with the existing local gods, they also normally demoted the Earth Mother or Earth Goddess that figured heavily in all Bronze Age civilizations and cultures. It appears that this is always done by making her the wife of the supreme god. To the Aryans, she becomes Diva, the heavenly wife of Shiva. The Aryans also took over the existing temples of the mother goddesses and replaced them with one of the other primary male gods, normally Sutra. These actions appear to have been an attempt to connect the new religious beliefs of the Aryans with the older order to help legitimize their claims with the native population. Another unique aspect of the Aryans and the Indo-Europeans in general is that they would normally leave the existing female priesthood and temples dedicated to the mother goddess in place if they accepted the new priesthood and the changes that were made to the belief system. If the female priesthood did not accept the change, which normally occurred because the local population would not accept this new introduction of a male god as the husband of the mother goddess, then the Aryans would introduce a new female goddess and then force it upon the priestess and the local people. This new goddess would normally be the daughter of one of the 3 primary male gods. Once this daughter goddess had been established, they would then introduce a new male god who would typically take the form of a lover or husband of this new daughter goddess, which would normally take the form of one of the original male gods they had originally tried to introduce. This is but just one example of how willingly and creatively the Aryans would modify their pantheon to suit local traditions and customs and beliefs to cement their control over the native population. It is also an example of how the pantheon of gods grew as the Aryans became more creative with the different tribes of the local populations that would not accept the Aryan gods in their original forms. If neither option was acceptable to the native population, then the Aryans would destroy the temple, wipe out the entire female priesthood, and then move the people back to the central area of settlement. If the common people continued to resist the Aryans, they would either kill them all or sell them into slavery, with both methods being used as an example of what would happen to those who resisted the Aryans. So it was normally in the best interest of the female priesthood and the local population just to accept the changes without complaint. The Aryans also introduced one more important god named Yama, who was the powerful god of the underworld, commonly known as the god of death. As with other lords of the underworld, Yama is not only the lord of the underworld, although he is normally thought of as the embodiment of death itself, who wields a noose and he uses to seize the souls of those about to die. But he is neither good nor evil. In many ways, he's viewed much in the way of our modern idea of the Grim Reaper. In so many ways, he's just the embodiment of a hard reality of the mortal existence and who performs a vital duty to help maintain the balance of life. According to the Vedas, Yaman is said to have been the first mortal who died, which by virtue of precedence makes him the ruler of the departed dead. As for the gods Idra and Engi, Yaman is also believed to be a twin, who according to tradition, his twin was a mortal who was warned of the coming of the great flood by the god Vishnu and instructed to build an ark to save himself and his family in the same manner as Noah of the Bible. With our esoteric knowledge and understanding of the dream vision of Enoch, we now have the necessary information to begin understanding that many of the twin gods of mythology are a vague but direct reference to the legendary twin brothers leading the second phase of the Exodus. Although the twin brothers themselves have been forgotten or hopefully written out of the mythology, their memory lives on embedded within these legends and mythologies and folklore of twin gods or semi-divine beings who were also twins. It is also not uncommon for the great leaders or kings to be elevated to semi-godhood while still alive. Then upon their death, they would be elevated to being a full god. The pharaohs of Egypt may be one of the best examples of this ancient practice. The next step is to begin realizing that many twin gods of mythology are related to different aspects of the twin brothers and their exploits during this second phase of the Exodus. As in the case of the Aryans, and as we will see in other cultures, it appears that one brother was a great warrior, a bringer of death, and the other was a more thoughtful and peaceful man, most likely a priest. The mythology paints a picture of where one brother is the warrior king and the other one is the warrior priest. This type of leadership structure would allow the twin brothers to control the military arm of the tribes, along with the religious leaders giving them total control over all the tribes. It is this leadership structure that appears to have been first established by Moses and Aaron at the beginning of the Exodus. Before we can move on to the next part of the story, we need to quickly explore what makes the 6 gods we have so far explored essential and how can they stand out from all the other gods the Aryans worship. One of the biggest factors that makes them so unique is that they are found in every culture that the Indo-European people assimilated and fused with in largely unchanged forms. Usually only their names change, but some of the early symbolism related to each of these gods also change as they change hands. One of the more interesting symbolic changes that appears to occur just as the original Vedic religion of the Aryans was transforming into Hinduism. During this long transformation of this religion of Aryans into Hinduism, many of the most familiar symbols associated with each of the gods, such as the trident being associated with Lord of the Waters, or the crescent moon representing the mother goddess, were all associated initially with the supreme god. Unfortunately, the Vedas, nor the many other writings of later Hinduism, give us a clue why these symbolic changes occurred. Although the Vedas and Hinduism are silent on the subject, we do know through our esoteric knowledge that much of the symbolism represents advanced weapon systems that were used by the gods. We can also speculate that these weapons were initially associated with Shiva or the supreme god, but over time they were transferred to various other gods to be used as the political situation of the gods changed. Adding to all this confusion is that the primary symbolism appears to also be a symbolic representation of the Aryans reshuffling and modifying their pantheon to suit the local population's existing traditions and customs. By understanding that the Indo-European people and the ancient tribes of Israel who continued onward to other lands under the leadership of the divine twin brothers are the same people, we can begin to follow these people as they moved around the world. This also allows us to understand that the original religion of the children of Israel was not a monotheistic one, but was instead a purely polytheistic one. However, before we can explore how this original polytheistic religion turn into a monotheistic one, we need to first finish the rest of the journey of these people. But before we can continue upon our journey, we must explore one last but equally important event that occurred during the invasion-like settlement of these people, that which greatly aids in us following their movements around the world. This event is they always destroyed the existing Bronze Age economies of every culture they encountered. This economic destruction occurred because these ancient Bronze Age economies were command economies that were directly dependent upon long-distance trade for raw materials and products. The Bronze Age city-state's entire economic system was utterly dependent upon a highly organized central system of control. A system of control that was directly dependent upon the writing and record keeping. When these tribes of the children of Israel killed the elites and replaced them with their own illiterate people, this caused the existing economic structure and organizational structure to collapse. Not only did the local economies collapse, but more importantly, the long-distance trade that it was dependent upon collapsed along with it. As the economies collapsed, so did the institutions that were supported by the taxes that these economies generated. One of the most visible signs of this general collapse of the Bronze Age economy and the international trade was the large-scale construction projects of the Bronze Age ended abruptly. The only new construction that occurs is not seen until long after the Indo-Europeans have assimilated and fused with the local population, transforming them into entirely new cultures and society. In the Indus Valley civilization, it is not until Hinduism is fully formed and firmly cemented at all levels of society that we see the formation of new kingdoms, which begin with new large-scale construction projects. Even though we see construction begin once these new societies had formed, it is generally at a much smaller scale, with much of it being confined to building temples, temple complexes, and the mighty towers that the gods once stood upon. Without long-distance trade, one of the most important institutions that collapsed along with it was writing. As the Bronze Age economies collapsed, there was simply no need for record-keeping or long-distance communication. Additionally, most scribes were in the service of the ruling class, with many of them being killed along with the elites they served. Additionally, these elites were replaced with largely illiterate tribal people who had very little use for scribes. Without scribes and the general collapse of the economy, along with a new illiterate ruling class, writing quickly disappeared for the ordinary person. Only a small handful of scribes that happened to be in the service of the temple that was taken over by the new priests retained the art of writing. In many areas of the world, writing as a whole disappeared, including within the temples and the new priesthoods. This collapse of writing, except for small pockets of scribes who wrote exclusively for the priesthood, is one of the primary reasons this period after the collapse of the Bronze Age civilization is usually known as the Great Dark Age of humanity. Although all the mighty Bronze Age civilizations collapsed except for two, and a great dark age of ignorance fell upon humanity, this is a time that became an age of religion that was much like the medieval age of Europe of 1,000 years ago. Although it becomes a time of religion and a complete devotion to the gods, we can see new religious structures and beliefs come into existence during this dark age. As the new religions began to take hold and a new economic model began to form that was based on a straightforward centralized agricultural system that is much like the feudal system of the medieval age of Europe. It was a simple system that conscripted the common people of the lower classes into a life of being a simple peasant farmer, and that they gave all that they produced to the priesthood of the central temple in the devotion to the gods. As we go farther into the story, we'll see that this is also an additional way to help track these people as they moved around during this great second phase of the Exodus. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below and subscribe for future videos.